Prime Minister, you wanted a copy of your withdrawal agreement.
Our agreement. This is it. Our deal. Yes. We takes back control. Money. Borders. Laws. Blue passports. No. It hurts the people, makes them poorer. But I finds it, and negotiates it. We want it. We has to do it. Okay. We asks the people if they want it, and then, no! Stupid, tricksy Remainers. They ruins it. But if the people want something else, then false. This is the only deal. Juicy and sweet. We want it. We need it. We will have it. But they told us, precious, they hates the deal. All of them hates it. They want a people's vote. People's vote? Ah! They steal it from us. Curse them, we hate them. But the peoples are our friends. You don't have any friends. This is the deal.
Let me first ask what you expect to happen today in Parliament. Which amendments do you expect to go through? Which are you behind?
Well, the SNP will support the amendment in the name of Yvette Cooper, which seeks to open the possibility of an extension to Article 50, and I hope that one passes. But of course, it's entirely possible that none of the amendments that will be debated today garner a majority in the House of Commons, and there'll be no resolution to the deadlock that has gripped the House of Commons now for 2.5 years. And the closer we get to the 29th of March, which is the date that the UK is due to leave the EU, the more important it becomes, I think, to contemplate an extension of Article 50 to avoid the possibility of crashing out of the EU without a deal. The Conservative Party still appears to be negotiating with itself, completely oblivious to the fact that they also have to reach an agreement with the European Union. The whole thing has been a shambles, and unfortunately it's people the length and breadth of the UK that will pay the price if the UK crashes out at the end of March with no deal.
What kind of economic effects would you expect if the UK crashes out with no deal? There's been a lot of accusations of Project Fear when people talk about deaths and issues with shipping in goods. On the other hand, there are people who run businesses, pro-Brexit people who think they would have no problem. How do you see it in Scotland?
Well, before I come on to answer that question in the context of no deal, let me say, first of all, we're already feeling the effects of Brexit. There are already investment decisions being delayed or cancelled. Businesses across Scotland, across the UK, are finding it harder to attract talent as people from other European countries or even further afield are less keen to come to the UK. So it's having an effect already. And even if a deal is agreed in advance of the 29th of March, that's just a withdrawal agreement. There will still require to be a negotiation about the terms of the future relationship. So that uncertainty will continue for the next couple of years. So the economic effects are being felt and will continue to be felt even if there is a deal. If there is no deal, I think we can expect significant consequences of that and significant impacts. The Scottish Government, like the UK Government, although we don't want to see a no-deal scenario, is having to plan to put in place contingencies, and we could see disruption to food supplies, disruption to medicine supplies, aviation would be affected. It would have an effect potentially on every aspect of daily life, and that's why it can't be allowed to happen. The Prime Minister should, without any further delay, rule out the prospect of leaving the EU with no deal. She should make it clear that if she cannot strike a deal that wins a majority in Parliament and is agreeable to the EU, then she will not allow the UK to leave without having a deal in place. And the longer she fails to do that, the more culpable her government becomes for the implications.
OK. Can I ask you about the implications for a further independence referendum? Nicola, I know that you've, First Minister, said that March you'll give more details, perhaps. You've suggested at least you'll give more details within that kind of time frame. But the longer the Brexit uncertainty goes on, does that leave you with a lot more uncertainty as to when you'll hold another independence referendum?
Well, I'll set out my views on the timing of that, as I said, as you've just indicated there, over the next few weeks. I think we need to wait and see at the moment which direction the UK takes, whether it is leaving the EU with a deal, without a deal, whether Article 50 is going to be extended, whether there's the possibility of another EU referendum or even a general election. And, I'll wait until there is hopefully a bit more clarity in that and then set out my views on the timing of an independence referendum at that stage. But there's no doubt at all the whole experience of the last 2.5 years for Scotland has underlined the importance of having decisions about our future taken in Scotland rather than at Westminster. Scotland's in the position right now of facing exit from the EU against our democratic wishes. More than 60% of people in Scotland voted to remain in the EU. We face being taken out of the world's biggest single market. The views of the Scottish Parliament have been ignored. So that really does strengthen the argument that Scotland shouldn't allow its future to be determined by Westminster. We should take more control of these matters into our own hands.
How much pressure is there, First Minister, how much pressure is there within your party to hold another independence referendum?
Well, clearly my party supports independence, so I think most people in my party would want to see Scotland having the option to choose independence as soon as it was practically possible. But there's also a sense of pragmatism. People understand that there are uncertainties around Brexit. These uncertainties, although I oppose Brexit, were not inevitable. The mismanagement of Brexit by the UK government has caused more uncertainty than was absolutely essential. So there's a pragmatism in my party, but I think there's a growing sense in Scotland generally, not just in my party, that the time is coming to take matters around our own future into our own hands. And as somebody who has long supported Scotland being independent, not as a way to turn inwards, but to play a fuller part in Europe and the world as an independent nation, that's music to my ears.
Minister, do you expect, or would you like to see another Brexit referendum as well? Do you think that is what the country needs?
Well, I think on a UK-wide basis, if Parliament can't agree a way forward, then it seems to me the only credible or sensible thing to do is to put the issue back to the electorate. And, let me be very clear, although I want Scotland to be independent, I still care what happens in the rest of the UK, and it will always be in Scotland's interest for the rest of the UK to remain in Europe or with as close as possible a relationship to Europe. And therefore, if there is an option of another EU referendum, then I think that's one that should be taken. Parliament and the UK government have had 2.5 years to try to come up with a workable plan for leaving the EU, and they have completely and utterly failed to do that. And in those circumstances, allowing the electorate to determine this issue seems to me to be a credible way forward.
Do you see a path between where we are now and a general election? Clearly, you wanted Corbyn to call a no-confidence vote. He did that. He lost that. He could do it again. Do you see a path to a general election?
Well, right now, I don't think anything can be ruled out, including a general election. I mean, I've, in my lifetime and certainly in my career in politics, I've never known a period that has been as unpredictable as this. We don't know what will happen by the end of today, never mind by the end of the week or the end of the month. So a general election is certainly a possibility. I would welcome a general election. Theresa May is clinging to power by her fingertips right now. The Tories are clinging to power by their fingertips. They're a government in paralysis. Nothing other than Brexit is happening, and that's not good for anybody. So a general election certainly would be something I welcome, but whether that is possible under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act that governs these matters now remains to be seen. But certainly we're in territory now where nothing, whether that's a second EU referendum or a general election, can be ruled out at all.
Hello there. Welcome to another edition of The Monarchy with me, Samson Sees, here on Press TV. For those of you new to this programme, we give you alternative stories about the not-so-okay UK. These are the very issues that are not being addressed on mainstream media networks. Some of these issues even get more depressing when you keep digging down the rabbit hole. Take the VIP paedophile ring, for example. Some of the top figures in the British Parliament and even Buckingham Palace have been sexually exploiting young, innocent people for years. This disturbing truth has been happening for decades. Good old UK law for you there. The police cannot even get near these sick people. It wasn't that long ago that those who claimed that there was a massive paedophile ring involving officials in the highest levels of government were written off as conspiracy theorists and kooks. That is no longer the case, at least in the UK. It turns out that this so-called conspiracy theory was true and is finally being officially investigated.
A powerful elite of at least 20 prominent establishment figures formed a VIP paedophile ring that abused children for decades. Senior politicians, military figures, and even people linked to the royal family are among the alleged abusers. Peter McKelvey, the former child protection officer who first raised the alarm about high-profile individuals engaged in child sex abuse, said that their campaign of abuse may have been going on for as long as 65 years, but there has always been the block and the cover-up and the collusion to prevent an investigation.
Over the years, we've received many allegations of abuse at the highest levels of government. Past prime ministers, past senior members of the British cabinet have been mentioned as abusing children. It doesn't get much worse than that. We're talking about the worst kind of crime committed by the people who are supposed to be running the country.
A teenage boy working at Buckingham Palace revealed he was groomed and sexually abused by a VIP paedophile ring there. The lad was also assaulted at the royal family's Scottish retreat Balmoral. In a heartbreaking note, the boy, then just 16, told how he was the victim of exploitation of the highest order. The disturbing account was passed directly to the then Home Secretary Leon Britton, but he ruled it was not practical to investigate. Palace officials have already been linked to the notorious brothel, the Elm Guest House in southwest London. It was first in 2008 that news about deep roots of paedophilia inside Buckingham Palace emerged. Former Buckingham Palace butler was unmasked as a sexual predator who ran a paedophile ring while serving the royal family. Bachelor Paul Kidd, 55, was leading a secret double life as a serial child abuser who molested a string of boys over a 30-year period.
Well, it seems that in Great Britain, protecting paedophile politicians is now turning to a matter of national security. Those with the sickest minds and who wish to act upon their destructive fantasies understand that they can most easily get away with their deeds if they are protected by an aura of power and ostensible respectability.
The government will establish an independent inquiry panel of experts in the law and child protection to consider whether public bodies and other non-state institutions have taken seriously their duty of care to protect children from sexual abuse.
Victims of child sexual abuse have warned Theresa May they will withdraw from the government's controversial official inquiry unless major changes are made. In an open letter, 24 signatories claimed the inquiry as it stands is not fit for purpose because of what it is being asked to examine and the proposed chairs. The signatories said they had no option but to end engagement with the inquiry until Mrs. May scrapped the current panel, replacing it on a transparent basis, declared a statutory inquiry and extended the cut-off date to 1945. They wrote to Home Secretary Theresa May's officials complaining the Home Office seems to be running the inquiry to meet others' needs rather than those of survivors.
We need three things: justice and support for victims, the truth about what happened and how the Home Office and others responded, and stronger child protection and reforms for the future.
After the release of a report into Home Office cover-ups last month, Mr. Cameron seemed to dismiss survivors' concerns, saying some who've been looking for conspiracy theories will have to look elsewhere.
I blame them as much as I do my perpetrators, and I at least want an apology for the way that I was treated. Because as an adult woman, as a child I didn't know any different, but as an adult woman, I now know that the way I was treated was not correct, was not right, and shouldn't have happened. And not just with me, but then continued to happen with other people.
Meanwhile, child abuse survivors want the timescale of the inquiry into VIP paedophiles pushed back to the 1950s to avoid a whitewash. Groups representing the abused also want a dedicated police unit to examine evidence uncovered during the probe to ensure no powerful culprits escape justice. However, victims' calls fell on deaf ears, and May snubbed sex abuse victims for trip to Brussels. She skipped the emotional meeting, where victims were demanding that the troubled historical abuse inquiry starts as soon as possible. She had already warned that allegations of child sex abuse by a Westminster paedophile ring represent only the tip of the iceberg.
Just a reminder, the royal family is granted absolute protection from public scrutiny in a controversial legal reform designed to draw a veil of secrecy over the affairs of the Queen, Prince Charles and Prince William. With the elite paedophile ring now being exposed in the UK, all roads are leading to the British royal family. Some claim this law was passed to keep this connection hidden, but as we now know, Prince Charles's favourite was Jimmy Savile, who is the biggest paedophile and necrophiliac in modern British history.
The Aborigines were deemed to be subhuman, little more than animals, which was to justify not only the theft of their land, but their extermination. An edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, still in circulation when I was at school, described them as only an animal of prey, more ferocious than the leopard or the hyena. He devours his own species. So they were hunted and raped and massacred. And few doubted at the time that genocide was official policy. A government report in the 1850s spoke of the success of poisoning Aborigines, 100 of them laid out at a time. But until quite recently, little of this was even acknowledged. In Tasmania, the Aborigines were said to have died out. In fact, they were hunted along with kangaroos and almost wiped out. In New South Wales, by 1845, the tribe who had watched Captain Cook sail here into Botany Bay was reduced to 3 women and a man. In Victoria, an Aborigine